Welcome to you all. My name is Andrew Chung. I'm artistic producer of London Symphonia, and welcome to this edition of Behind the Music. And today I'm joined by Graham Mackenzie. Hello, Graham.
Hello.
And Bryan. How are you, Clark?
Good. How are you?
Terrific. Thank you. So this interview is ahead of our concert called Inspired. And before we talk all about this program, just a little bit of introduction. So Graham Mackenzie, he is our principal oboe, has been for a number of years now. And interestingly, he's joining us on this pan-North American interview from Texas. And you started a new position in Texas at where, Graham?
It's called Stephen F. Austin State University.
Fantastic. And professor of oboe?
Yes.
I meant to say esteemed professor of oboe and lecturer, and busy days, right? This is a new role for you. And
yes, involves us. Sorry.
Oh, and you'll be flying up here to join us on December 11th.
Correct.
Tremendous. We're so happy to greet you and have you join us yet again. And Clark, you're the artistic director, executive director, wearer of many hats for Aeolian Hall, and a fabulous pianist too. And I'm just very grateful that we're able to collaborate on so many interesting and various ways. I would also add you're a master shepherd of getting your organization through the pandemic.
Oh, I'm not done with that job.
Oh, you've seen it all up to now. So you guys have done an amazing job managing to keep live concerts going on and recorded concerts going on in London. So bravo to you and your team, and thanks for joining us today. So Inspired, Graham, how did this concert come about?
Well, we were talking about programming ideas for this season, and one of the things I love about London Symphonia is that we're not afraid to do innovative programming, kind of take a chance and do something slightly different. And I thought, okay, well, if we're gonna do a chamber music concert, I'm going to propose these pieces because these are some of my favorites. These are ones that if I could do these for a living, if I could just be in an ensemble that played this combination, piano, quintet, and sextet all the time, I would. I think it's an incredible combination. And these pieces in particular, the Mozart quintet and the Beethoven quintet, those two forms are the core of this for me because they're strongly related to each other, and they're both incredible works of music, but they're different enough that I think they complement each other well in a program. And we also wanted to add the Poulenc because we wanted to round out the program and show that this form of the piano quintet, so piano plus oboe, clarinet, bassoon, and horn, was taken into the 20th century as well with Poulenc, and then a flute was added. So it simply stemmed from wanting to put all these great works on one program because I just think they're just incredible pieces of music. I mean, and I think the title Inspired is very apt for many reasons, but among them is simply because when I heard these pieces for the first time and played them, I was inspired. I thought this is just the most incredible music and I can't believe I've never heard this before. And that was one of the reasons for wanting to put them on this program, is just to expose people to it. They're wonderful pieces.
Now, when we add the flute into the combo for the Poulenc, and so then you've got 6 players, but that is a standard wind quintet then plus piano. But did Beethoven and Mozart write for those wind quintets that formation?
No, they didn't. They wrote a lot for harmony music, so 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons, and 2 horns. But they didn't write for the woodwind quintet combination. So that's what I think if they had, they would have written for the piano sextet combination that Poulenc did. Right. But it wasn't something that they did, no.
And Clark, have you played these pieces before?
No, not at all. I may have played the Mozart way back in the day, but memories and age. I don't remember. It seems familiar anyway.
That's convenient. Yeah, that's great. And yeah, lots of notes for you to learn, and
Yeah.
great, beautiful program.
Yeah.
So chamber music, we all love chamber music. What is what's chamber music mean to you, Clark?
Oh, wow. So I think it's sharing, in a very intimate way, where you take out the conductor, and everybody sort of has more equity in the ensemble in terms of artistic input and communication. It really is a much more natural way, I think, of writing and making music than some of the bigger showpieces for piano and orchestra. And although especially in my youth, I loved playing concertos, but this is more like, you get some friends over to the house, and you might have a really nice charcuterie and bottle of wine open, and we're all around the piano and say, hey, let's try this out. It's a little bit more like that for me. So when people come to this concert, I kind of envision them sort of imagining they're in their own living rooms, and that there isn't that stage. And I know, Andrew, you and I talked about this at some point. We're going to move those concerts off the stage onto the main floor and do it in the round, right? Like that'd be so cool post-COVID, to recreate a different kind of set for this. But I almost feel like, we should be putting out some armchairs and, oriental rugs on the floor and stuff like that, just to
floor lamps,
yeah, exactly, to create that mood that really is evocative of the intimacy that's involved with this. And my experience with musicians over the years, I mean, chamber music is a very broad category because it includes art, song, and everything else, but musicians, if given the chance, I find the majority, especially not the youngest ones who want to be all the divide and conquer stuff, but as you mature as a musician, I think a lot of them really prefer that genre of making chamber music. But the unfortunate thing in North America is there isn't really a great opportunity for that, for the most part, especially in mid-sized cities or smaller areas, to hear a lot of chamber music or to make a lot of money off of chamber music, which I know a lot about. It's hard to sell to the public because they don't have a lot of experience with it, right?
Right.
So
yeah,
that's
maybe a more foreign concept than concerto with orchestra. It's
yeah, I think everybody loves the Olympian. If you're a neophyte, if you don't know a lot about classical music and you go hear the Tchaikovsky concerto, right, you're like, wow, look at those hands move, look at those masterful big melodies and romanticism, and they just don't have the opportunity. I mean, our audience who's coming to this concert certainly have, but where is chamber music in the school system? Where is chamber music in day-to-day life? We don't live that way right now, and I think we should.
And so, Graham, if the aim of chamber music is to kind of democratize the music somewhat, and beginning with the Mozart, do you think that that's successful, or is it more concerto form with the piano superstar and the wind accompaniment? What do we get?
Well, this is a debate, and I'm curious to hear Clark's perception on this. I feel like when I first started playing these pieces, I was much younger, and I sort of felt like, well, the piano tends to play an accompaniment role in this kind of situation. But then I realized, wait a minute, this might be more like a piano solo piece with wind filigree kind of decoration. But really, when you start to play it, you realize that, in fact, I think that overall the impression is that it's quite democratic among all of the musicians. Actually, all the wind soloists get quite a lot of soloistic material. Nobody is just in the background kind of accompanying. And Same with the piano. Sometimes the piano is simply filling out what the winds are doing. Sometimes the piano is very much in the spotlight and the winds are either not playing at all, as often happens actually in the Mozart. Many of the main themes are introduced with only the piano playing. Or it'll be the piano playing the theme with just minimal wind accompaniment. So and the Beethoven is similar actually in that way. So overall, I would say that everybody in the group has a lot to do, and everyone has to be both soloist and leader as well as a follower, which I think makes playing these pieces wonderfully stimulating and exciting.
I love it. And what about the Poulenc? So all of these composers were master pianists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the Poulenc music, what is the writing like? Like, what is that piano music like? Is it virtuosic? Is it soloistic, or is it really collaborative in this way?
For me, I mean, it depends on where you come from. Like, in terms of my own hands, it's a bit big for my hands. You know, I have average size hands. I think Poulenc must have had a really good reach because a lot of the figurations are constantly spread. It's like playing the Brahms second concerto, which I've done too. It's you know, you're like this the whole time. You know, it's not a natural position. But you know, if I was going to go back and compare, so you know, the thing is that Mozart and Beethoven were trying to sell, right? So I mean, there is one account of Beethoven playing this piece, and he takes off and does like a 20-minute improvisation on the cadenza, and the wind players kept getting ready to come back in, and then they didn't come back in, right? Like they were pissed. They were really pissed off. So I think you know, both Mozart and Beethoven probably wanted to strut their stuff in a certain way. I do find though that you know, the writing, when you're not playing a main tune, right, it's a lot of figurations in both the Mozart, a lot of traveling material, and I feel like the tapestry of the wind ensemble is really nicely knit into that. Like I don't find it, you know, piano egoism writing particularly. And the Poulenc is, I think, a lot more equally divided in terms of me playing like a subsidiary role or then taking over a solo, and you know, I'm often doubling solos in the Poulenc with the winds, which will be tricky, you know, because when I think I have the tune, I want to play it, right? So I want to be heard, but I should probably not be that heard if we're going to hear the oboe or whatever.
Like two people talking over each other. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I think it's a different kind of texture for sure in the Poulenc, and a lot of really like quick shifts, like unbelievable. Like the intro of the third movement, for example, you know, you're going thump 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 thump, and you gotta go thump thump, right? Like the old typewriter is just flying, sometimes I don't make it there. Like, hopefully by Saturday.
Of course by Saturday. Of course by Saturday. So these composers, like, why did they write it? I guess you hinted to it, right, Clark? I guess this is to make money. I think in the case of Mozart and Beethoven, certainly you know, I mean, we have to think at the time period. I mean, we're sort of in that in between time where, you know, with Bach and all those guys, it was like you had your job and you work for somebody, and this is like starting the freelance stuff but still hoping to get the attention of a prince or, you know, archduke or something like that, so that they would just give you some money, right, or give you some opportunities. And I think that they were experimenting. They were trying to figure a way through this. And you know, I think with Beethoven, for example, you know, rewriting this you know, with strings, and then his publisher making it into a string quartet. It was like, oh, this is popular work. Let's see how else we can make some money from it, right? Yes. Yeah. Poulenc, I don't know. I mean, I don't know enough. I know I've played a lot of Poulenc, but I don't know enough about
how he made his money per se. I know he did a lot of work with Pierre Bernac in art song, and he wrote a lot. He was very popular in England, so I think his concerts sold and his music sold really well. He had some big hits, but I don't think he was in the same kind of struggling as Beethoven and Mozart at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about the pieces themselves. So without getting too nerdy, a little bit about the form, Graham. So tell me, like the Mozart and the Beethoven, they seem to be of identical form, same key, E flat.
Yeah, they are very similar in form. So just so when we talk about form, we're just talking about how the music is organized, like what happens in the music and then what happens after that, what happens after that. So for example, both the Mozart and the Beethoven are similar in many ways. They all have 3 movements. They all go fast, slow, fast in terms of their tempo. And then the first movement, both of them are in what's called sonata form with a slow introduction. So you hear sort of a slow, stately introduction of both of them. And then you hear, it's 3 parts. You'll hear an exposition where you'll hear 2 contrasting themes. Then you'll hear a development where those themes are sort of, it's like you take a theme, you kind of break it up and throw it in the dryer. It gets spun around, it gets turned upside down, it gets fragmented. It's called a development because that music is developed in various ways. You kind of change the key center, and you do all sorts of things to create tension and instability, like where are we going, where are we going? But then we come back to the recapitulation where we hear the music from the exposition again. And it's usually followed up with a coda to kind of say, and yes, we really are home now. We're not going to any other places musically. And the last movement is what I would call burger form. It's called rondo form technically, but it's like a burger. You start out with a theme, then you have a little episode where something else happens. You come back to that theme. You have a little episode where something else happens. You come back to that theme. And this happens several times, but you keep on coming back to that theme. It's like, oh, there's that theme again that we heard at the beginning. So they're those 2 pieces are very, very similar in form. And that's simply because at the time, almost every composer was fitting their expression into these boxes, basically. If you look in later periods, that's not the case, and people start doing their own thing much more. But for example, if you look at any of the symphonies that are written in the classical era, every single one of them, and I do mean every single one of them, with pretty much no exception, the first movement is always in this sonata form that I described. And Beethoven and Mozart's are no different. It's what they do within that makes it really interesting. But it does show you just how much, even for composers as innovative as they were, and as Clark talked about, they were trying to push the boundaries in many different ways. They were trying to put it all within this context of a form that the audience would know and that they would recognize, because that was the idea, that if you're a concert goer and you went to a lot of concerts, you'd start to recognize this form, so you'd hear it all the time. It's like we all know the format of a limerick or a knock-knock joke. And we kind of have this expectation, which makes it the more satisfying when you hear the punchline. And for an audience member, they would have been very satisfied to hear these forms kind of to have their expectations met by the form, but also to have their expectations dashed sometimes in a wonderful way to create surprise.
Professor Mckenzie, that was a wonderful explanation of form.
Hopefully not too nerdy.
I like the knock-knock joke.
That's really good. Give that guy a job, damn. So, and then
part of my job is teaching a survey course from the Middle Ages all the way to the present day. So you get pretty used to explaining things in a very short way because there's so much music history and you just don't have time to get into it. So
that's amazing. Yeah, you basically encapsulated I don't know how many years, a lot of years of classical form in 2 minutes. Phenomenal. But if you're Poulenc, sorry, and then you're you're at 1931. You've got a lot of choices. If you wanted to write, piano and wind sextet, but what does he do? He turns to classical form somewhat. Who would be, Clark, your turn.
Well,
Professor
Gershwin
Bryan.
did too, right? Gershwin wrote an opera and he wrote piano concerto and he wrote, he turned to these larger landscapes. I think, I got to know Chick Corea, and, he was fascinated by the Dutilleux piano sonata. And I think it's things that have evolved. It's like the novel, right? It's kind of like, it's a good structure to be able to put ideas into. But the question is, maybe in people's minds, is why was there so much conformity during the classical period and the Baroque period versus, what happened afterwards? And it's very much tied into the middle class, right? And being able to have a musician then become an independent artist and not have to worry about, selling to a prince or a church or something, and then being able to kind of experiment and make some money off of it and allowing them that freedom. And by the time you hit the 20th century, as much as there was, the 12-tone system and all kinds of things evolving, it's still, people knew these forms, and so many, you think of Prokofiev, Ravel, people who kind of lived into the early 20th century, they all returned to those forms as well, even when that experimentation was going on, because it's something that people have culturally learned and are kind of used to digesting ideas inside of those, as you say, boxes. I think that's the main reason.
But then
there's also the golden mean, right?
Yeah.
All those, we could go on and on and on, going deep into this one. But the proportion piece and the psychological impact and the the mathematical kind of relationships is also another thing for people to look into.
That's great. Now, at the time when the pieces were released, they were received pretty well. Is that what we gather, or?
Yes, the Beethoven and Mozart for sure. I think Poulenc had some very mixed responses. Florence Schmidt, who was a composer and a critic at the time, wrote, I quote, "It was wandering and vulgar."
Right.
And I think, it's people, people don't like change, right? That might be another reason why sonata form has lasted so long. We don't like change.
Yeah, and the Poulenc to me is just it's wonderful. I mean, you can hear it. This is it's Paris and it's crazy. It's early 20th century, and it's, to me, it's like stuff careening out of control at times, and crazy abrupt changes. But still,
there's ragtime and there's jazz, right, in that piece, and that's an interesting thread as well, because Beethoven and Mozart were great improvisers as well, right? So it's something I think classical musicians today are not as steeped in, and hopefully that's going to shift with curriculum and so on. But we're just not taught to improvise, but all these composers were great at it, and they like to use that as a tool.
So the instruments they were composed for, yes, wind quintet, wind quartet, and piano, but Mozart's instruments were a little bit different, right? Like mildly different.
And Beethoven's. Yeah.
So tell us, Clark, about the differences in the keyboard between Mozart and
that piano is still evolving, right? My piano tuner always says that he thinks Yamaha is going to make him deaf because they keep getting more overtones out of the piano, and every time you tune them, like, you're going to lose your hearing because they're so loud. But the early pianos, you know, first of all, weren't constructed with the iron frames that we have, so tuning stability wasn't there. The strings were gut strings, catgut strings, and the hammers were buckskin. So, you know, the resultant sound was very percussive because the hammers were much harder hitting the strings, and the tones didn't last as long as they do on a modern piano, so they died away. So the singing style was tricky, right? So you know, one thing people don't realize is Mozart had a pedal and used it all the time, but it was always clean and clear. And then, you know, you enter Beethoven, and I mean, by the time you went pretty much deaf, I mean, they were making pianos quadruple strung strings, right? So he could try to hear. They were really trying everything to improve on the instrument. And, you know, if we segue up to the 20th century, the middle pedal was invented around the turn of the century. I think, you know, Steinway started getting like extraordinarily well known. So those designs have pretty much stayed the same to today. You know, companies like Fazioli, Yamaha, there's quite a few that are still experimenting with all kinds of things. I just got a new piano, an S series Yamaha S7, and it's the first in Canada. It's all handmade. The strings are handmade. It sounds like a Bösendorfer, right?
Wow.
Like incredible overtones. It's crazy making. It doesn't sound like, if you tell people it's a Yamaha, they're like, no, that's not a Yamaha, you know, if they hear it. So I think that's kind of, you know, how things have changed. And it's really like, if you imagine that the keys were a bit smaller, you know, with Mozart's piano and Beethoven's piano. So, you know, the ease of playing those instruments too, like super easy to play a forte piano, the early pianos. Like you just have to breathe and the keys go down, right? Whereas you move into these modern pianos and it's a lot more Olympian stuff. So adapting your technique for those different styles is really quite interesting.
Right. So I guess a lighter sound in Mozart's time with Mozart.
But percussive.
And
Right?
percussive.
Clean and clear.
Clean and clear.
Always, yeah.
And then what about the oboe, Graham?
Yeah, so the oboe, we really start to see the oboe in the Baroque era. So right before Mozart, right? This is, we're talking like Bach and Handel and Telemann, Vivaldi, those people. And it was more like a recorder at the time. Open tone hole. The reeds kind of went in the top. There are a couple little keys in the pinkies, but it had a few things that made it different. The bore is also different. It wasn't conical at that time, which in the contemporary oboe and the classical oboe, the bore starts small at the top and gets bigger as you go. It's shaped like a cone. And that changes the sound, the tuning, and the resistance. So in the Baroque period, we start with this oboe that, you know, it's just like, again, like a recorder, and you finger it. There's not much resistance because you didn't need to play long phrases. Music was kind of in short gestures. A lot of dance music, bottom, bump beat stuff like that. But now we get to the classical period, and we still don't have the long, lush melodies that we have in the Romantic, but it's starting to go ahead slightly in that direction. So the instrument is a conical, they make it a conical bore now, and they add some keys. So there's more resistance, but still not as much as the modern oboe. It's still quite easy to articulate and play short phrases. The main difference you would hear is that the sound is not as loud on a classical oboe. It's not as rich. It's quite clear. It sounds kind of in a lot of ways like the piano, a bit more percussive and a bit kind of a very clear and focused sound. And it just won't project as well. And the intonation would not have been as good, partially because instrument makers didn't have the technology. And also the reed makers didn't have the technology, because of course on the oboe, you have to make your own reeds. I make all my own reeds, every professional does. And they didn't have nearly the same technological tools as we have now to make really good reeds. So it probably would have been less in tune, right? Not as pleasing a sound, more kind of bright, and a bit more percussive. But then, of course, by the time Poulenc was writing his sextet, very much that would have been in the same vein as today's oboes, just a little less developed. And I mean, as Clark said, they're all, and of course, they're still experimenting to this day.
And I guess it's the art of the performer then to, even though you're not using a historical oboe and you're not using a pianoforte, you think about that touch, you think about that range of color. You don't come and with your most bombastic romantic sound and bring it to this Mozart quintet. I've run out of time for today. This has been delightful chatting to you two. I'm really looking forward to hearing this concert, and I know everyone out there is. So thanks again, Clark, and thanks again, Graham.
A pleasure.
Yeah.
A pleasure.
And good luck with our concert Inspired. And this will be December 11th, 7:30 at Aeolian Hall. It's there's some in-person tickets available as well as live streamed and on demand for 7 days afterwards. Okay, thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.